Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. You know, if I'm like some of you, I don't really understand what was wrong with NAFTA. I thought it was a pretty good deal. The president thought it was a terrible deal. So he said, let's blow up NAFTA. Okay. So now he's got to deal with Mexico, but he's leaving out Canada. And I don't think we ought to have a fight with our dear friends to the north because they've been our allies for years and years and years. But because of the deal with Mexico, the S&P 500 has hit a new record on the NASDAQ, and that's what the news is for today. The stock market is booming.
Well, this deal apparently revises and renames President Clinton's NAFTA deal. But as Pat mentioned, one of America's top trading partners, Canada, still hasn't signed on. That doesn't mean they won't, hopefully. Gary Lane has the story.
In an Oval Office phone call with Mexican President Nieto, Donald Trump explained his reasons for renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement, including dropping the name NAFTA.
I like to call this deal the United States-Mexico Trade Agreement. I think it's an elegant name. I think NAFTA has a lot of bad connotations for the United States because it was a ripoff. It was a deal that was a horrible deal for our country.
Economists like the Heritage Foundation's Stephen Moore were surprised.
If you had asked me 6 months ago, are we going to get a trade deal with Mexico before Canada, I would have said it was so improbable, but here we are.
The new agreement with Mexico provides zero tariffs on agricultural products. It also requires that 75% of the parts of cars sold in North America be produced in the U.S. or Mexico. 40% to 45% of the parts of cars sold must be made by employees making at least $16 per hour. News of the deal gave an already strong economy a shot in the arm as the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 jumped to record highs. President Trump said negotiations to bring Canada into the new deal should start soon.
If they'd like to negotiate fairly, we'll do that. You know, they have tariffs of almost 300% on some of our dairy products, so we can't have that. We're not going to stand for that. I think with Canada, frankly, the easiest thing we can do is to tariff their cars coming in.
But some economists argue hefty tariffs on cars and other products could lead to a trade war that may only harm a booming U.S. economy.
If you want free and fair trade with a level playing field, let's get the tariffs down. The United States will benefit from that because we already have the lowest tariffs.
Moore and others say the U.S.-Mexico agreement jumpstarts prospects for a negotiated deal with the Europeans and gives an upper hand to negotiations with China. News of the deal comes as the U.S. economy is seeing record low unemployment and rapid growth. The Atlanta Federal Reserve reports the U.S. economy so far in the third quarter is growing at 4.8%, the fastest rate in 20 years. President Trump has criticized the Fed for raising interest rates. Still to be done to keep the economy moving forward, Moore says a wage hike is needed to bring more help to middle-class workers. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. It's amazing. The president, he's a negotiator. He plays tough, and there's a certain amount of bluff and bluster in there, but he seems to be getting his way. It's remarkable. And the big one is China, and the thing that China, it's not a question of tariffs, it's a question of them stealing our intellectual property. If anybody does business in China, they have to give over access to their intellectual property to the Chinese. And this causes trillions of dollars worth of damage to our companies. So that's the tough one, and it's not a question of raising tariffs back and forth. Now, in the Middle East, the Iranians are brandishing weapons again and making noise. In other news, Iran is expanding its reach, and John Jessup has more on that.
That's right, Pat. An Iranian general says his country controls the Persian Gulf and the U.S. doesn't belong there. The head of the Navy for Iran's Revolutionary Guards told the Tasnim news agency, "We can ensure the security of the Persian Gulf, and there is no need for the presence of aliens like the United States." Tehran has said it might stop the flow of oil from the Gulf in retaliation for U.S. sanctions. It could do that by closing the 21-mile-wide Straits of Hormuz, where an estimated 17 billion barrels of oil ship through the straits every day. The U.S. keeps a Navy presence there, Pat, in the region to ensure those shipping lanes stay open.
They've got something called Karg Island, which is the main terminal for Iranian oil. And that's a very vulnerable thing, and it would be very easy for us to drop a few bombs on that terminal and put them out of business. And I think the Iranians are playing a very dangerous game. They're crowding into our ships. They're trying to be hostile, but they don't have near the firepower we do. And if they want to play tough, I think we ought to play tough right back. And it's time for them to stop bluffing, because what it is a big bluff. They have all these overblown items of rhetoric that they use. But in the final analysis, they will lose in any kind of a contest with the United States. And I think of course, the Straits of Hormuz have got to stay open. They can't, they could mine it and make it difficult for a short period of time. But so much oil comes down through that strait. You see where it is from the Persian Gulf. Maybe 60% of the world's oil comes through that strait. And it would be easy for them to interdict it, but it would also be easy for us to blow them out of the water. And it's something that we really have to do. John?
Pat, Iran is also looking to expand its presence in Syria. Its defense minister just signed a military and defense agreement with Syrian leaders. Troubling news for Israeli and American officials who want to expel Iranian troops from Syria and back behind their own borders. Chris Mitchell has a story from Jerusalem.
Iran's defense minister Amir Hatami led a high-level delegation to Syria that signed new military and defense agreements with the Assad regime. It's a signal Iran wants to maintain and even increase its military capabilities inside Syria. Yet Israel sees Iran's military presence inside Syria and on its northern border as a direct threat. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stated repeatedly Iran's military presence inside Syria is a red line Israel won't tolerate. It's also a priority for the Trump administration.
This is a very delicate, very difficult situation in Syria, but one that we're not going to allow the Iranians to take advantage of.
The United States has been pressuring Iran to pull out its fighters from Syria, and U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton addressed the issue with reporters during his recent visit to Jerusalem.
That Iran obviously had a strategic plan to create an arc of control from Iran through the Shia areas of Iraq into Syria, linking up with Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's not something that we want to see.
Bolton also defended Israel's recent attacks against Iran forces inside Syria.
Every time Iran has brought missiles or other threatening weapons into Syria in recent months, Israel has struck those targets. I think that's a legitimate act of self-defense on the part of Israel.
Iran's defense minister said his country's presence inside Syria won't be dictated by a third party, and that they would continue to support the Assad regime. Iran has provided thousands of fighters in Assad's fight for survival against rebel forces. Their continued presence inside Syria sets up a showdown with Israel and the U.S. as the more than 7-year civil war is coming to an end. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. And Pat, you know that we've been reporting on Iran's expanding influence across the Middle East for some time.
Well, we have, and you know, the thing that we need to remember, ladies and gentlemen, God's word will come to pass. It really will. I mean, we can report the news here as it's coming down the headlines, but the word of God is very significant. And I point to Ezekiel, where it points out to an invasion of Israel in the, quote, latter days. It's a coalition that will include Persia, and it will include Turkey, and it will include the Caucasian region that is described as Rosh, which I don't think is Russia, but it's the Caucasus, where those Muslim people live. And then along in that will be the Sudan. So we're looking at a coalition against Israel in the latter days, and that coalition seems to be forming up. But it'll include what's called Persia, and you know the people in Iran are wonderful people. They really are. They desire freedom, and they've been hijacked by that bunch of mullahs who have taken control, and it's a theocracy and it's a dictatorship, and they're under great pressure. And I knew the former Israeli ambassador to Persia who told me that, you know, my Persian people, they're good people, and they want to rebel. And so perhaps the college students and the workers and others will come together. But when they tried to get free of this, the Obama administration did nothing to help them. Trump is, but I think it's a little too late. But you know, this Bashar Assad, he's used chemical weapons against his own people. For a man who was trained as a medical doctor in Europe, to do the barbaric acts that he has done against his people is just appalling. And he needs to be overthrown. They should have moved him. He breached that so-called red line a long time ago. But are we going to do anything about Syria? I don't know, but something should be done, and it should be done fairly quickly. John?
Pat, North Korean officials are warning talks to rid that country of its nuclear weapons could fail. CNN reports that a letter was delivered to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo stating plans for denuclearization may, quote, fall apart. The letter reportedly said the process can't move forward because the United States is still not ready to meet Pyongyang's expectations for a peace treaty. Last week, President Trump directed Pompeo to delay his trip to North Korea because talks weren't moving quickly enough. Well, President Trump expressed thanks for John McCain's service to America last night. The remarks coming at a White House dinner for evangelical leaders. The president talked about his efforts to protect religious liberty and the need to rally voters to the polls in November. CBN's White House correspondent Ben Kennedy has the details from the North Lawn.
It was nothing short of a state dinner here at the White House, only the president wasn't honoring a foreign head of state, but evangelical leaders.
America is a nation of believers, and tonight we're joined by faith leaders.
Faith leaders like Reverend Franklin Graham and Pastor Paula White.
It's an honor to be here.
The president also took a moment to publicly express thanks for Senator John McCain's service to America.
Our hearts and prayers are going to the family of Senator John McCain. Going to be a lot of activity over the next number of days, and we very much appreciate everything that Senator McCain has done for our country.
Trump then turned to the dinner's purpose, honoring America's faith and freedom.
In recent years, the government tried to undermine religious freedom, but the attacks on communities of faith are over. We've ended it.
The commander-in-chief drummed up applause, highlighting efforts to combat religious persecution.
We brought home hostages from North Korea, including an American pastor, and we're fighting to release Pastor Brunson from Turkey, and we've made great progress.
Trump told the evangelical leaders it's imperative that people of faith vote in the midterms so that progress can continue.
They're facing the possibility of a Democrat Congress that, if they take control of the legislature, are going to either impeach this president from office or at least paralyze him while he's in office. And I think they rightly know evangelicals don't want either one of those things to happen.
Christians helped propel Trump into office in 2016, and this was one way of showing his appreciation for their contribution to American society, and also pledging to protect their rights so that work can continue.
The president just wanted to celebrate, and not just that, but what our churches and houses of worship do every day. To provide spiritual direction to the lost, to heal the brokenhearted, to save marriages and lives. That goes on every day in America.
The support you've given me has been incredible, but I really don't feel guilty because I have given you a lot back.
Faith leaders told CBN News the dinner was the president and First Lady's idea. Yes, it was a time to say thank you, but also that the work is not done. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, the White House.
Thanks, Ben. Pat, have you ever seen a dinner like this at the White House before?
Never, never, never. I've been to some of them when there were a lot of people there, but nothing like this where they honored just evangelicals. It's amazing. Well, the evangelicals voted 82% for Trump in that presidential election, and they have been loyal along to him. All the things that have swirled around him, the evangelicals are standing firm. Why? Because he has done more for evangelical Christianity than any president I have known in my lifetime. And it's remarkable what he's done, and the evangelicals are strongly with him. But the big thing are the courts, and he is changing the Supreme Court. He's changing the lower courts. There are a lot of things that have been done by the American Center for Law, for the ACLU, to strip away our religious freedom. And it's amazing where he's standing up for the rights of evangelicals. You cannot imagine the animus that there's been, like what we had with the IRS blocking people. The Federal Election Commission with Lois Lerner, when she was in there, she was just dead set against evangelicals, and they went all the way through the government. There was tremendous hostility to evangelicals. Now there's a new sheriff in town, and thank goodness he's doing a good job. So congratulations, Mr. President. All right.